Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cullen, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grainne Wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the trooping and solitary, and those who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka Fireside, the Marrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cullen, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grainne Wail. Of giants right down to fairies, about the trooping and solitary, and ghosts who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah! Fireside, the Puka Fireside, the Marrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside. Yeehaw. Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore and mythology, we retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, culture and history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. O'Lahan. I am your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 100 of Fireside. I can't believe I'm saying that. Today on the Irish Storytelling Podcast, we are going to be telling the very apt tale of Conn of the 100 Battles, because today I am Kevin of the 100 episodes. But first, I want to give a very quick thank you, get this straight out of the way, to every single one of my listeners, new and old. If this is your very first time listening, thank you so much for joining. Listen to this, then why don't you go right back to what we've been building over to the last 2 years now. Incredible. And if you are a returning listener, whether you've been listening since the very beginning and disappeared and came back, or you started listening last week and have caught up, thank you so much for your continued and growing support. I love doing this podcast. It has been the single most rewarding thing that I've ever done, and I'm in no danger of stopping anytime soon because I keep feeling it gets stronger and stronger, and that is all down to you. That is all down to you who listen each week, who who message me on Instagram or on Patreon, who supported on the Patreon. That's all down to you. I cannot thank any of you enough. Please do follow me over on Instagram at FiresideBard. If you want to get in touch, the firesidebard@gmail.com is the best place. If you're not on Instagram, Instagram is the best place to get in touch with me. And if you really want to support the podcast, you can do so over at patreon.com/Fireside Podcast, where you can join our growing list of very kind and loyal benefactors. Oh yes, I wanted to give a big thank you to the newest patron this week, which is John McDermott. He joins Cian O'Mahony, and Ian Skinner as the latest patrons for this month. Thank you so much to each of you and to all the other patrons. Again, I will just keep saying thank you for financing this podcast and financing the project that I'm developing to take this podcast to the next level for 2021. I began things there with a live version of the Fireside theme. I thought I would kick things off first and foremost with a live version. Actually, I didn't even, because before that, you may have noticed a very sinister opening to our 100th episode. I opened with a poem, which is my favourite poem. It is The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats, because for many reasons, as it happens, last week was the 100th anniversary of the publication of The Second Coming. It has been my favourite poem for many, many years, and it just felt like the right thing to open with the 100th episode. I wanted to open the episode with a bang, and I couldn't think of a better piece to open it with than The Second Coming, because this podcast, all roads lead back to Yeats. They begin there and they end there, so it seemed appropriate that I would open with, I think, his best written piece. I think a lot of Yeats scholars would be in agreement with that as well. But I have a very personal attachment to that piece, which I will talk about now. But I just wanted to start things off properly by talking about how we got here. How did we get to 100 episodes of Fireside? For those who may not have listened to the very beginning, or maybe who did and don't remember or whatever, just because it's the 100th, it seems right to talk about the beginning. I started Fireside because I wanted to learn more about my own mythology and folklore. I'd always been hugely interested in folklore and mythology, but I knew an immense amount about Greek mythology and German folklore, but I knew very little to nothing about my own country and my own nations and my own culture's folklore. So I wanted to do something about that. Now, there was, at that time at least, no podcast out there for what I was looking for. And I just started to notice a trend happening, because within the same couple of years, you had Stephen Fry publish his book Mythos, his retelling of the Greek myths. You had Philip Pullman releasing a book on grim tales for young and old. You had Neil Gaiman releasing his book on Norse mythology. All of these books became massive bestsellers, and it said to me that there was an appetite that either never went away or that was growing again for the older tales. And Fry, Pullman and Gaiman are three of my favourite storytellers of all time. Stephen Fry, I would listen to anything that he reads as an audiobook, starting of course with Harry Potter. He is the most incredible narrator of Harry Potter, but he is an incredible writer in his own right as well. His book on poetry, The Ode Less Travelled, was one of the most influential things I've read. I only read it for the first time last year, and I've read it twice since, and I'm about to begin reading it a third time. But also, he has just released his third of his Greek myth books, and all of them are incredible. I've just finished Troy, the third part, which follows on from Mythos and Heroes. It is the third book, and I think it's his best yet, because the Iliad, which the story of Troy features in, it's the original story of Western literature, but Fry he tells these stories in such an accessible way, and he puts his own personality into them, and he's not afraid to break away and acknowledge that he's telling you a story. And I love that because it makes you constantly feel like he's speaking to you as a person. He's telling you this story, he's educating you. It's everything I look for when I read or listen to an audiobook, and it's everything I would want to be as a podcast host and as a storyteller. And there's nobody better that has that than Fry. And then where Philip Pullman is just a master writer, a master writer of prose, and again an incredible fountain of storytelling. And his books, his Dark Materials, it's my single favorite trilogy of books. It's The Subtle Knife is quite possibly my favorite book ever written. And again, I'm a big fan of audiobooks, and I really like it when the author reads them themselves. And Philip Pullman reads his audiobooks of The Northern Lights, The Subtle Knife, and The Golden Compass, or The Amber Spyglass, sorry, The Golden Compass was then what Northern Lights was renamed. But don't watch that awful film. Watch the new series on BBC. That's really good. That's getting it right. But Pullman reads his audiobooks, but there is a cast of characters in them, which I usually don't like. I usually don't like when there's a cast in an audiobook, and it definitely does take some getting used to. But I also get it, and the cast is small, and they really embody the characters, so I think it works very well. But his Dark Materials is another series that I revisit nearly every year. I just think it's the greatest. It's the greatest story. It's got the most incredible characters. It is written for. It is aimed at a wide audience. You know, it is. Philip Pullman thinks falsely classified as a children's book or a young adult book because he doesn't like to write for a specific audience or a specific age range. But it really, more than any, certainly taken for younger audiences novel, it treats you like an adult. It doesn't shy away from anything, and it's an incredible book. And if you are an adult and you think of it as a kid's book and haven't read it, please do, because I haven't encountered a story that has affected me as much as it, and will continue for many years, I've no doubt. And then finally, what more can you say about Neil Gaiman? Neil Gaiman constantly teaches us all more about writing and about storytelling, and you can't even take your pick on incredible books that he's written. He has the widest oeuvre, definitely oeuvre. My favourites including Neverwhere and Nancy Boys, American Gods, Coraline, Stardust. Stardust is probably my favourite of his books. And then you come to his adaptation of Norse mythology, which he really condenses and really makes himself his own. And I say many times, I got the name Fireside Bard from Neil Gaiman, from a review on his Norse mythology where it said that Gaiman takes the place of Fireside Bard. And I loved that phrase so much. But I love Neil Gaiman talking about writing more than any of the others. That's probably where I love Neil Gaiman the very most, is he gives you such a joy for the craft of storytelling and the craft of writing. Neil Gaiman got me writing with a fountain pen, because I have terrible handwriting, which I'm trying to improve. It's been one of my lockdown skills to try and improve, is to improve my handwriting. And Neil Gaiman writes all of his first drafts. He handwrites all of them, and he gets immense pleasure out of notebooks and pens, which are things that I adore. And yes, whether you listen to him interviewed on like the Tim Ferriss podcast, or read any of his short story collections where he breaks down his craft, or just watch interviews with him on YouTube, he's just the most incredible person to look at and hear talk about the craft of writing and the craft of storytelling. So you put those three in a blender, you get the personal narration of Fry, the prose skill and imagination of Philip Pullman, and the passion and the craft of writing and storytelling of Neil Gaiman, on top of an imagination and an incredible breadth of work. You put them in a blender, you get what I would want to to be and what would strive to be as a storyteller and as a writer, I could say that they're the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost of Fireside, or rather, probably more appropriate to say they're the Sky Father, the Metatron, and the Gallows God, to borrow from each of the respective mythologies and folklore that they specialise in. So from there, to bring it back then to Ireland, to my knowledge then, and pretty much still now, I would think, there wasn't anything comparable really to that I could find. But a few years ago, I encountered a book by Yubbledy, W.B. Yeats, called Fairy and Folk Tales of Ireland. I just happened to stumble upon it in Hodges and Figgis in Dublin. And that's where we get back to Yeats, from the Second Coming at the beginning, because I'd always been drawn to Yeats. I thought it was the most beautiful work. I fell in love with the Second Coming because about 10 years ago I came across a video of a reading of the Second Coming on YouTube. Actually, it's even longer. It's probably 15 years ago. And it's an animated video. If you type in the Second Coming W.B. Yeats on YouTube, you'll encounter this video that is a still image of W.B. Yeats that is animated to make it look like its lips are moving. And it's not credited as those, and perhaps you might not believe me, but it is my granddad reading it. My granddad was an actor in Ireland called Chris Curran. And every now and then, my family discovers another clip, an old ad, or a still from an old stage play he was in. And he is the narrator of this Yeats piece, and he did an entire album of Yeats poems, as it turned out. And he died when I was very young, but he was an actor and a storyteller, Shanachie. He did everything that I wanted to do, and I very much followed in his footsteps, and I still feel he's with me an awful lot. So the Second Coming always meant a huge amount to me. Like, even if it had been the worst poem ever written, it had a huge influence on me because of the personal attachment. By an astonishing coincidence, it also just happens to be one of the best pieces of poetry ever written. But so Yeats has been with me through my granddad through that. And then when I found this Fairy and Folktales book, I thought, here's the perfect opportunity to get in more knowledge into folklore and mythology. And there was a companion piece, I have them too right in front of me, to the Book of Fairy and Folktales of Ireland, is Lady Gregory's Complete Irish Mythology. Lady Gregory, who, with W.B. Yeats, established the National Theatre of Ireland, the Abbey Theatre. So these two companion pieces of fairy and folklore and Irish mythology, they became the Bibles of Fireside. And through exploring them, and they can be quite dense, but they were the starting off point to every other book, every other source online in person that I found and developed for Fireside. They all came from Lady Gregory and W.B. Yeats's two books. I look at us now, and then from then, I can remember the earliest conversations talking to my best friend Rory. He was over filming in Bristol, talking to my girlfriend, and I remember sitting in a bar on Camden Street in Dublin with my girlfriend and just saying to her, I think I'm going to start a podcast on Irish folklore and mythology. And the only other person I knew who really had a podcast was Stephen Colfer from Dream Gun, an incredible sketch comedy group called Dream Gun. They do a thing called Dream Gun Film Reads, satirical rewriting and retellings of famous film scripts. They have a podcast on it. Check it out. It is hilarious. They're really, really, really good. And Stephen Colfer was the member of them that I knew the most. And so I just sent him a message and I said, would you talk to me about podcasting? And he did, and I'll be forever grateful for him for that. And he said, why don't you talk to Head Stuff? So I went to the Head Stuff podcast network. I sent on and made a rough demo together. I sent it on to Alan Bennett and Paddy O'Leary at Head Stuff, and they gave me a meeting. And a couple of weeks I went in, I met them. They said that they were interested. We talked about the logistics. They asked me, did I know how much work was going to go into it? They told me how it would work, how it wouldn't work, what length it should be, this, that, and the other. And all of a sudden I was in the recording studio and we were recording Fireside. And they assigned me with a producer and editor called Jamie Reynolds. And Jamie is who this episode is dedicated to more than anything, because as of last month, Jamie has stepped down as the editor of Fireside. I wanted to wait till now to make the announcement. I'm very sad to see Jamie go, as he was my closest collaborator on the podcast. So since Jamie's departure, I have actually been editing Fireside myself. It is not my strong suit, but it is something I always wanted to become better at, because I have the equipment and I love recording and writing the episodes, and the editing was the one thing I couldn't do. But Jamie laid out exactly, like, Jamie is where the sound effects come from. He's the one who makes this sound like a professional podcast, you know. Alan and Paddy provide incredibly wise support and have provided Fireside with a home, with a studio, with a beginning audience. All of that is because of them. But it's Jamie who made this podcast sound the way it does. And hopefully none of you out there will have noticed too much. Like, with the changeover, I've worked hard, and hopefully we'll get better and better at editing the podcast together. But yeah, for the last about month or so, it's been edited by me. But Jamie was on board until, you know, episode 95 or whatever, and he was sad to go, and I was sad to see him go. He's gone back to college, and it was a very amicable parting, and I'll miss him a great deal. But this episode, the 100th episode, is dedicated to you, Jamie, because I possibly wouldn't have made it this far without you. So that far in, we better get to a story, mayn't we? This story, it came to me a while ago. It's surprising I hadn't done it so far, but I'm really glad now I didn't, because how could you have a better title name, a better titled story for 100th episode of a podcast? And that is Conn of the 100 Battles. But the more I thought about it, and as I adapted it, the more I realised more and more why it was the perfect story for the 100th episode. And we'll talk more about those reasons afterwards. But I just wanted to get the story first and foremost, and we'll talk more. This is it. This is the 100th episode. This is Conn of the 100 Battles on Fireside. Conn of the 100 Battles. On Leah Fall, the stone of destiny, brought from the island city of Phalius in the northern regions, brought by the Tuatha De Danann and placed at the hill of Tara. On Leah Fall would give out a shout proclaiming the high kings of Ireland, Nuda, Brez, Lu, the Dagda. All were proclaimed by on Leah Fall. But when the Hound of Ulster, Cuchulainn, had visited Tara with his foster son, Louis of the Two Red Stripes, on Leah Fall failed to shout out under Louis's stance, and Cuchulainn took his sword and split the stone in two. The stone of destiny never proclaimed another king, and that Tara hill became unkempt, overgrown, and all but forgotten. A century passed, and a baby was born in the area we would come to know as Connacht, the western province of Ireland. The very name Connacht would come from the name of this child, Conn. But we would all know Conn by a grander title. For when this baby was born in the west, it was said 5 roads appeared in Era, all leading to the hill of Tara. When Conn was grown, he found himself on one of these paths, not knowing they hadn't existed until his birth. He walked with his 3 druids and his 3 poets. There was little you couldn't accomplish with a sword in your hand and 3 poets and 3 druids by your side. Conn wanted to stand on the hill of Tara. He wanted to search for the people of the Sidhe, of the Tuatha De Danann, who had been forced underground by the landing of the Gaels. Conn thought if he stood on the hill of Tara and looked in every direction, he might see a figure of legend. But what Conn found instead was of far greater significance. The western lad walked up the tallest hill he could find. When he stood in its centre, the ground beneath him gave out a colossal cry that reverberated through all of Meath and echoed across the entire island. When the ringing in his ears subsided, Conn turned to one of his druids and asked, "What in the name of the gods was that?" His druids looked at him. "We'll need 53 days to answer that." "It's always an absurdly specific number of days with you lot, isn't it?" Conn set up camp and hunted for 53 days. He then returned to ask his druids, "Did you think of an answer?" "Yes. Beneath the hill you stood on was Anlia Fall, the stone of destiny, brought by the Tuatha De Danann from the enchanted city of Phalius. The cry it gave out proclaimed you king. But how many years you will be king is not for us to say." "So wait," said Conn. "I'm king now." The druids weren't so sure. "Anlia Fall has not cried out since it was severed by Cuchulainn over 100 years ago. We don't know how authoritative its word is anymore. But regardless of whether you are recognized now or later, it is certain you will be king." Before Conn's mind even had a second to wander, a great mist began to shroud the hill. But this was not rain or cloud. This was purple and mysterious. Conn could feel a force pulling him, turning him. Then they all heard the sound of a horse's gallop. Poets and druids and Conn all looked in every shrouded direction, but they could not tell where the sound was coming from. "Look out!" cried a druid. Conn ducked just in time to avoid the end of a spear that had been launched at him. 2 further spears came through the mist, each barely missing Conn and landing in the earth. Conn inspected these. The spears were of a metal he had never seen, like solid gold, but light as a hazel branch. Finally, the rider arrived through the purple haze. The horse was tall and white, with fetlocks blowing like rising and falling waves. The rider's face was covered in an emerald green and gold cloak. This was the source of the 3 spears. "It will be a bad fortune on you for throwing 3 spears at the future High King of Ireland," cried one of Conn's druids. "On the contrary," said the rider, "I have come to welcome the future High King of Ireland. And indeed I welcome you all into my home." "Well, that's a fine welcome," said Conn. "And where is it that you come from that welcomes kings with the attack of a spear?" "All in good time," said the stranger. "Come, you must all be cold and hungry from camping on this hill for so long." Neither Conn nor druid nor poet could argue that. They all followed the rider through the mist a short distance to a golden tree standing at the entrance to a rath. Like the stranger's cloak, this earth palace was roofed by grass and wildlife, with golden structural walls. Inside was the warmth and luxury fit for a king. The ceiling was made of white bronze, and there was a fire for warmth and banquet tables for feasting. The stranger then took his royal place at the centre of the fort. He invited his guests to be seated. He also removed his cloak to reveal a shining face more beautiful than Conn or his party had ever seen. Too beautiful to be Irish, too beautiful to be mortal. Then a young woman entered, who matched the rider on every level of height and beauty. Surely they are twins, thought Conn, or at least from the same family. The woman held a large jug of silver adorned with golden rings. Conn got a whiff of freshly brewed red ale, a future brew of Smithwick's, no doubt. The woman asked the master of the house, "To whom will I serve this ale?" "Serve it to Conn of the 100 Battles," said the master, "for that is what history will know you as. You will have a long and prosperous reign, but none of it will come easy, and you will fight 100 battles between now and your death. You will not win all of them, but rest assured you will win the lion's share. After that, we will drink to Art of the 3 Shouts." "Who is that?" asked the newly christened Conn of the currently no battles. "He will be your son," said the stranger. The master of the house then proceeded to tell Conn of every member of his dynasty who would follow him, and for how long they would be king. "They will name an entire province for you, one to be forever known as Connacht. One day the Irish will be given an option to go to Hell or Connacht. Nevertheless, this will be the place where language and culture will be most preserved." Conn was then served the rib of a boar, and he thought it must have been a very large boar because this rib was 25 feet long. But between the poets and the druids and himself, the flesh was eaten as the red ale continued to flow. Finally, their host joined them. "How do you like your server?" he asked Conn, referencing the beautiful woman who had served their ale. "I confess," said Conn, "I have not seen beauty to match either her or you." The master smiled. "I am glad to hear you say so, because her name is Eru, and she is the sovereignty goddess for which our island is named. She has served you. Now you must serve her." "And who are you?" "They called me Ildonach, the master of all arts. I am falsely called a sun god. I fathered the Hound of Ulster, and now I proclaim you Conn of the 100 Battles. My name is Lou." To be continued. Folks, as you all know, Fireside is a proud son of the Headstuff Podcast Network, which is Ireland's largest network of independent podcasts and a loving home for the creative and indeed the curious. There are so many other podcasts I could recommend to you on the network, some of which inspired me to approach Headstuff myself. Here's a taste of one you might enjoy.
I'm Connor Reid with words to that effect. How did the Victorians invent time? Where do all those pirate cliches come from? Should we all read romance novels?
His mouth glided up her neck with feather-like.
Why are kids so obsessed with dinosaurs? What makes the perfect detective story?
We'll just have to go and solve this crime ourselves.
What happens to culture and society in a post-apocalyptic world where everything
Opened her mouth to say something, but all the
has stopped? Words to that effect tells stories of the fiction that shapes popular culture. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts and at wttepodcast.com.
And that is the story of Conn of the 100 Battles on Fireside for the 100th episode. Conn of the 100 Battles, Kevin of the 100 episodes. Naturally, I picked this as the story for the 100th episode because it has 100 in the title. Not too many of those kind of stories. But as I adapted it, as I was reading it, and even in the telling there, it became clearer and clearer why this is the perfect episode for the 100th episode, because my inner OCD likes the symmetry of episode numbers, hence why I very sillily used Roman numerals to number the podcast. But every decade of episodes, every, for 10, 20, 30, 40 has gone quite well in terms of, like, 30 was The Legend of Sai, 40 was The Wooing of Etain, 50 was becoming Cuchulainn. A lot of the round number and the beginning of each set of each 10 has kicked off with a really important story and a crucial story to their respective sagas. And I've really liked that. I've really liked the idea of that, to ring each new 10. And this is no different than that. But why this feels like the right story for 100th episode is that all 4 cycles are in this story. And that's the benefit of having made our journey through the 4 cycles of Irish mythology and now diving back in, because Conn of the 100 Battles will begin the next stage of Fireside, which will be to go back into Irish mythology and fill in those blanks and gaps that we missed the first time around, and with hopefully a growing skill from my point of view. We may visit old territory, but it will be with new eyes. And the best part is that if you listen to this podcast, if you listen to all these podcasts, when you go back to these stories or visit these new stories that we haven't heard before, all of the rest of that mythology and folklore is still with you. And we have all 4. We have the mythological cycle, the Fenian cycle, the Ulster cycle, and the historical cycle, all in this story. We have the mythological cycle in talking about An Lia Fáil, which was brought from Fallius, which was one of the 4 cities of the Tuatha Dé Danann. We have the Tuatha Dé Danann mentioned right away. We have Nuda, Brez, Lu, the Dagda. Obviously, Eru and Lu are central characters in this story. We have the Fenian cycle in terms of actual timeline. Conn of the 100 Battles lived during the time of the Fianna. In fact, it was Conn of the 100 Battles who declared war against Clan Boscna, which was led by Cúil, Fionn McCool's father. He conspired with Gull MacMorna and his druid Taig, who was the father of Fionn's mother. So you have Conn of the 100 Battles ingrained right at the beginning of the Fenian cycle. And so far, that's, to my knowledge anyway, the only time we have encountered Conn is in that passing moment. But that is much later on. So we have mythological and Fenian cycle. Ulster cycle, we have this story of Cuchulainn smashing An Lia Fáil. When I was doing the Ulster cycle, I was waiting for that episode to come. I had always known that Cuchulainn was to have smashed An Lia Fáil. I didn't know when it happened though, and I had mistakenly thought that he wanted it to proclaim him king, and that's why he smashed it. It didn't proclaim Cuchulainn king. But turns out that's not the case at all. It was actually this Louis of the Red Stripes, of the 2 red stripes. It was Cuchulainn's foster son, and that is a story I hadn't encountered in my first go through of the Ulster cycle, and so it was really nice to have that mentioned in the context here. And maybe this is the story that it's a part of. Maybe that story only came into being to explain where An Lia Fáil went before Conn stepped on it. And then finally it brings us to the king cycle, or the historical cycle, because Conn of the 100 Battles is one of those king figures who may well have actually existed. He is thought to be an ancestor of many lines, much like Niall of the 9 Hostages. And it is, just by nature, it is the story of the inauguration of a king. And the more I read it, the more I actually like it, the more I love. I thought it seemed a bit simple initially. I worried that not enough happened, but actually I really like how streamlined it is. And there's actually quite a bit of action in it, and it's very specific action in this single rider aiming at these 3 druids, 3 poets, and 1 young Connacht man, and throwing these spears, and then the description of this house, and then these events. It's very like what we had been doing of Fionn McCool in the Old Man's House and Thor in the Land of Giants. There's that feeling of being invited into this magical place and things not being what they seem. And I think it might be my favourite of these inauguration stories, which I know we've done quite a few of, particularly in the historical cycle. But it made it feel like the right story to kick off our dive back into Irish mythology, which will always be the bread and butter of this podcast, but also feels like the right one for the 100th episode. And I'm particularly excited to revisit Irish mythology because sorry, my lamp just fell there, because I found a book recently. I actually don't know if I've talked about it. I certainly haven't talked about it enough if I have mentioned it at all. I read a book that kind of changed everything, and there's a book called Ireland's Immortals by Mark Williams. It was published actually the year that I started Fireside, or I think this edition of it was published at least. And I had spotted it in Hodges and Figgis a couple of times, but I'd never picked it up properly. And I bought it. And Mark Williams, the writer, he's a professor of English at Oxford, to my knowledge. And he wrote this book. It's very much an academic account of Irish mythology and of the Tuatha Dé Danann. That was really what I was looking for, though. I was looking to kind of improve and contextualize what I'd learned so far and fill in a lot of the gaps so that I could be, because I'm a storyteller, you know, more than, I'm not a folklorist or a historian or a mythographer. I'm a storyteller, hopefully a writer, you know, but I still want to I keep trying to like turn the volume down on my iPad and noise just keeps happening. I do apologize if you can hear that. But Ireland's Immortals was an incredible book for that. So if you're looking for something, it's actually really, really readable as well. You know, it looks thick and it is very much an academic book, but I found it really easy to read, and don't think just because I do this podcast that I'm on any kind of higher level of being able to read academic books on Irish mythology. You know, if it was dense, I struggled immensely with Lady Gregory and some of Yeats's books. I think they're incredible and overcame them, but they can be dense, you know, and you do have to get through them a little bit. But Ireland's Immortals was a huge influence because of that, and I'm dying to interview him. I want to interview Mark Williams, and I've got in touch with him and he has got back to me. We're just trying to hopefully sort out a time where we can do an interview over Zoom and record it. I had wanted to hopefully do it as a special treat for this 100th episode, but it'll be for another time, and I would just love to have him. I've never encountered someone so interesting and knowledgeable on Irish mythology in person, at least, and his passion for it, and his intelligence and his work, the immense amount of research he must have done for it, is so evident in this book. And I really want to interview him, and I hope that you all get to hear him as well. I'd love to bring him on, hear his point of view, the point of view of an academic and of a professor of this stuff. And I'd love to have a chat with him, and I'd love you all to hear him, and then to hopefully go out and buy his book. But I wanted to give, so this book changed my opinion on a lot of things. It contextualized a lot of stuff, and it made me very excited for diving back in to Irish mythology, having had the brief foray into the wild stories and then into the Norse mythology, the dip into Norse mythology. But there is one final thing I would like to do for the 100th episode of Fireside, and the very first episode of this podcast was of the Giant's Causeway. The Giant's Causeway felt like the right first episode because it was a folk tale about mythology, you know, because my understanding of what a myth was and what a folk tale was traditionally was that folk tales were about people and you and me, whereas myths were about gods and heroes. I think my opinion on that has morphed somewhat now. I associate myth more with poetry and myth more as a literary thing, as much as an oral thing, whereas I associate folklore as primarily oral. I don't know, and I ultimately don't think it matters, But I do think it's an interesting conversation that does keep following me and keeps coming up on the difference between the two. Stephen Fry had a brilliant description of myth, in that myth can inform us about a people and a time without being bogged down in historical fact, and basically saying that myth is like learning history, but it's fun. You know, you get the magic and the crack and the fun of storytelling, of fantasy, of drama, while also learning a lot about a culture, because even though myths were about gods that probably never existed, they were worshipped by people, and they go on, you know. It's incredible, this idea, whether you're sentimental or not. I just think it's incredible that these stories have been told in some form for thousands of years, and this idea that storytelling is this thing that we've always done. And I think there's something really cool about that, and we are all a part of that. That is much as part of us. And anyone who listens to this, these stories are ours. They're not mine. They're not Yeats's. They're not the person who first told them 1,000 years ago. They're all of ours, and they're one of the only things that we really can share with each other. So I just think that's pretty great, and that's why I am in no danger of slowing down the podcast. But the first episode, The Giant's Causeway, that felt like the marriage of the two worlds, because Fionn McCool was this figure from Irish mythology, but this was a folk tale that was separate to the Fenian cycle. So I always wanted to revisit The Giant's Causeway in some way, and I had this notion that I'd like to write it as a ballad, as more of a musical piece. And when I was going to do this for the 100th episode, I had totally forgotten that I had written something like that over the summer. And so I had another look at it. I tidied it up a bit. I feel very... this is the first time I'm showing this to anyone, but I thought I'm willing to put myself out there for all of you listeners. This is dedicated to all of you, because this episode is, like all the episodes, is for you. It's for everyone who listens to this podcast and tells a friend, who does whatever. And this is your special treat, final finale to the 100th episode of Fireside. This is the Ballad of the Giant's Causeway. The Ballad of the Giant's Causeway. Immortal gods bereft of prayer turned fairies neath the mound, while mortal heroes grew in scale to giants thunder and ground. And it's of a giant now I tell, to the fireside gather round. An aging giant named Fionn McCool lived north on Knockmany Hill. Done with his fighting Fianna clan, time was now to kill. Wed to Oon, a singular brilliant and a newborn baby thrill. But thundering cross on Alba shores was a giant twice the size, a brute named Benandonner with McCool set in his eyes. Fionn McCool is not very good, he called out to the skies. Fionn answered with a hurling rock, it landed now an isle. Nice shot, crap shot, said Benandonner with a wry and volatile smile. Fionn said enough, the die was cast, no time to reconcile. Stone by stone Fionn built a bridge, a causeway for the fight. A sleeping mountain greeted Fionn, both twice the size and might. Just before Benandonner could wake, Fionn ran back home in fright. That salmon of knowledge has gone to your head, do you feel like a big man? Chastising Fionn, a thought occurred, and Una's brain began. She said to her husband there and then, I have a cunning plan. Next morning came and soon arrived the great big bad marauder. He roared and cried and called for blood, declaring his world order. A whistle played a brand new tune, the Scotsman over the border. The giants soon found this Knockmany Hill to threaten Fionn's survival, but Una answered the knock at the door to Fionn's unexpected arrival. Keep your voice down and come inside, inviting her husband's rival. Una's brave and clever plan was to bake rocks into bread. When Benandonner took one bite, the teeth fell from his head. Una laughed, that's the favourite food of our baby in the bed. Benandonner looked across the room in search of the infant laddie. A cradle the size of a cottage thatch sent shivers through our baddie. If that's the size of the baba, he thought, how big's the daddy? The baby ate the stoneless loaf and gurgled in the crib. Ben stuck his finger in the baby's mouth and blood spilled on the bib. The baby bit Ben's finger off, that's no ad-lib, jib or fib. Tearing the causeway apart behind him, Ben ran, feeling half as strong. Back in the house, the baby stood, it was Fionn McCool all along. Una's plan had worked a treat, the source of folklore and song. And the remnants of the Giant's Causeway still sit on Antrim's coast. A hexagonal basalt rune it's not, you now know more than most. So when you sing of a giant's brawl, to Una raise a toast. And that's the Ballad of the Giant's Causeway, written by your Fireside Bard, and I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, that's a couple of first time sharing a piece, a ballady poem kind of piece that I've written with you all. First time I've played the Bowron live on a podcast. That's been one of the whistle and the Bowron are two of the things that have been keeping me going each and every day of lockdown. There's no doubt about it. I'm not saying I'm in any way good. I'm not. I'm quite bad. But playing them, the pressure of having to play them on air and to hear my own mistakes on the air is going to make me work that bit harder and get the better. And you got to start somewhere, don't you? So I hope you all enjoyed that. That very special performance was just for all of you, all of my listeners. And I hope that you enjoyed this 100th episode as much as every other episode. This extra long episode with lots of chat. When I edit this down, I'm hoping it's going to be a bit tighter, but I hope that you enjoyed. I hope you thought it was all interesting stuff. If you're a listener since the very beginning, please do get in touch. You know, I love hearing from each and every one of you. Best place is still always Instagram at Fireside Bard, or if you want to message me via email, thefiresidebard@gmail.com, or at patreon.com/Fireside Podcast. I'm starting Fireside as a business. We're launching in the new year. I can announce it properly within a couple of weeks now. We're just kind of launching the website and everything. We're getting a lot of stuff together. I've started speaking to the patrons about it already, because that's a bit more of a closed off audience, but I will be able to announce it to you all very soon. But that is where all of the funding for the Patreon is going. What have we done today? We have done The Second Coming. We have had the story of Conn of the 100 Battles, and we have had the Ballad of the Giant's Causeway. I hope you enjoyed them all. Thank you so much to Alan, Paddy, Connor at Headstuff, to Jamie, the former editor, and who will always have been the one who lifted this podcast to the next level. Thank you so much to my family, to my girlfriend Anna, to my best friend Rory, and to you, each and every one of you who have supported this podcast along the way. And I will see you all, you'll hear me all next time. And remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This podcast is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network.